This is Dave Monk, the Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
And we have a guest today, Jim Campbell, who is a local beekeeper, and he sells honey at the farmer's market. You may recognize him by his yellow vehicle in the southwest corner of the farmer's market. It's getting to be pollinator week, so we thought we'd do some announcement of pollinator programs, and we'll ask him about what he does with bees. So, first of all, I would like to say something about Jim Zimmerman. Went to his memorial service. Quite a few of the memorial services I go to are quite a lot of fun and interesting, despite the sadness of the passing. Often there's a record of what people have done and how they've interacted with people, and interaction from the audience is interesting. So the memorial service was held at the Barnhart family farm, which is on Yankee Ridge at the end of Vine Street. It's it's in sort of Savoy territory, so the junction of Vine and Church Street, Savoy, and there's a farm on the hill there, and the Barnhart family now has something like over 100 acres of restored prairie. They had one stage thought to do something like 400 acres, and the families have generated from older families in this area, so both father and mother Barnharts have academic backgrounds as well as farming backgrounds. And early on, we had worked with the Barnhart family to plant 1.5 acres in a circle on top of the hill. You're looking over Savoy. You're looking over the Ombra River and its drainage pattern to the Wabash. And at sunset it can be quite beautiful. There was a showing of a film that was made by Barnhart Associates, and it was done, some of it was done in the evening, so you got a feeling for the nature of the area without a lot of housing which has crept into the area. The university has also bought the land, but the prairie will remain in perpetuity according to the sorting out of things and cooperation with soil and water conservation districts and things like that. Families met. The mother came from, with her husband, from Carson City, Nevada, and an uncle came from Texas, and they had grown up here in places like Mason City, which is over near the Illinois River, and there were a lot of friends and relatives who had known Jim as someone who did a lot of work with prairies. That was his passion. He had also worked with Rick Orr as a florist assistant just around the corner from us, and he had stayed with Teo Gray and their family at Broadlands, where Teo has a property, but it extended that property by 5 acres, and Jim did a lot of the collecting of seed there, not collecting there, but collecting elsewhere for that 5 acres. And also they had an experimental plant propagation greenhouse, which they operated for quite some time. Greenhouses are difficult because they you have to be constantly watering and things like that. We've tried it. And, so Jim also did a lot of collecting for the Department of Natural Resources, Nature Preserves Commission. So Mary Kay Selecki and her husband John Taft, both naturalists working with Mary Kay was the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, and John Taft working with the Natural History Survey, which is now Prairie State. It's been renamed. Then Bill Smith was there. He was Jim's mentor and his teacher when he got a degree at Charleston in outdoor recreation and land management. Bill has also been in the services, and so Jim had been in the services for 3 years. Jim will have a brick in the memorial plot outside this Savoy Village building on Route 45. So Bill was dealing with that. Bill was there just before he took off for Alaska for a vacation. The Barnharts were there, and Don had a film of recent film of Jim, and Don's mother, Pat, was there too, along with her grandson. And after a while, they had a get together before most people arrived, and then a general get together. But the storm started to come up in typical Prairie style. So it was decided we were going to spread Jim's ashes, and so we hurriedly took a little trip out to one of the prairies where Jim was involved, and all had a hand in spreading his ashes before it started to rain and then pour. So typical Illinois prairie weather. And Jim also with Teo Gray's support and the Rose family's support. The Rose family does wrought iron work, and if you need to know about that, it's the sort of thing that's on the gateway to the Mike and Molly's just down the road. There's a Rose establishment, or an installation is the proper word. So Jim would cut steel to shapes of prairie plants and animals, and sold a lot of those and gave a lot away. Let me see. I'm just reading my notes here. I think I got to most of it. There were other friends and relatives there that just joined in the crowd, and we appreciate that. So now I want to introduce Kim Camp, who many of you know if you're listening to this program locally, as a beekeeper. And let's ask him to introduce himself. He's a honey person. So tell us just a little bit about yourself, perhaps where you grew up and how you got involved with bees.
I'm originally from Robinson, Illinois, and moved to Charleston, Illinois several years ago and finished school there. Became a beekeeper as a hobby through noticing a for sale item in the newspaper want ads. So I didn't have a market for honey, but all of a sudden had several jars full to do something with, cook or whatever, giveaway, and eventually started going to the small farmers market in Charleston, and then was able to take a space here in Urbana at the market, and I've been here for 20 years, I believe, and it's become a very large market, and it's enjoyable Saturdays when it doesn't rain.
So how many hives do you have?
Currently, I'd say in the neighborhood of about 24 that are alive, and I have 10 nucleus colonies that I'm waiting to hear about coming in. Those will be small half-sized boxes that hopefully will build into some healthy bees.
So can you tell us, people sometimes see hives established, but can you explain what a hive is and tell us a little bit about what's inside the hive? We have a nice drawing which we'll include in the YouTube program, but we have to verbally explain it. So could you explain a normal hive?
Okay. I believe the traditional term would be a Langstroth hive, which was invented by that person. He seemed to think that that was the approximate size home that bees like to live in. So we're basically talking about a bottom with an entrance, a flat surface with a opening in the front, at least one or two boxes that would be similar in width to or height to 1x10 piece of wood. That's what the bees live in. It would be about 16 or so inches wide and about 22 inches long. So two of those stacked on top of each other generally gives the bees enough room to live in. And then supers would be additional boxes that the beekeeper gets to put on top, and hopefully in good weather, good growing conditions like gardening or farming, the bees will have extra nectar that becomes honey, and that gets stored in the top boxes. So we just keep adding boxes as the bees need it. They're little pack rats, so in the ideal condition we get supers or additional boxes of honey to extract.
If you have a good season, you can sometimes have 4 extra supers on top of the
That's
two homes.
correct. I've seen old black and white photographs of beekeepers standing next to their colonies or beehives that are way taller than them, with maybe 2x4s propped up against the top to keep them from tipping over, but that is very unusual nowadays.
You usually try to harvest before that time, I think.
Yes, it makes it easier. You don't have to stand on the tailgate of your truck or ladder. Ideally, you would be able to have one or more supers or extra boxes on top, and as one fills up, you can put another one on. So it takes a few weeks for the nectar to dehydrate enough to actually become honey. So there's a possibility that you'd have one super that would be ready to go. You could take that off and leave the other ones on. And if, like I say, if the ideal conditions, flowering conditions are there, the bees will keep working. And it's possible to have one or two or more what I'd call extracting seasons in the year. If we have a clover, I might be able to take that off in a few weeks, and then later on we'll have some darker honey that's normally called wildflower, and that would be a little bit later on in the season.
So the clover is out at the moment. The sweet clover is out in flower.
It is getting thick. So we've had, seems like last year and this year had a late spring, so we've had the little white Dutch clover in your yards if you don't don't spray your lawns, and dandelions. And we've had locust, and I've noticed some catalpa blooming as well. If the conditions are right, the bees are out there looking for that nectar and pollen.
So tell me a little bit about the structure of the hive family. There's a queen and the drones and the workers. Tell us a little bit about it and how they sit in that framework. So you have, in each super, for instance, you have frames that are sort of hexagonal, the style of the hexagonal cell that the bees made. So they've got to start.
Yes. I'm going to say the traditional Langstroth hive has 10 wooden frames in it, which would be made up of small wood, similar to what you'd think of wooden lathing that they used to use for plastering. And inside this frame, or if you think of a picture frame, there would be a paper made out, or not a paper, but a piece of wax that's rolled out thin like paper and has little hexagonal indentations in it, and that gives the bees something to start with. That's made at the exact size of the cells that they draw out.
The piece of plastic is held intact by 4 or 5 wires sometimes.
Yes, originally all of the foundation would be made out of wax, and the last few years we've been able to use a plastic foundation. It's basically in the same shape, and then if we like, sprayed with a thin coating of wax to help get the bees convinced to start drawing those out. So they seem to work with it. Sometimes they're a little bit slow with the plastic.
Okay, so tell us about the structure of the hive. This is a communal hive. It's like a family with a brain, and you don't know where the brain is. They all work together.
They do. Of course, the queen is the mother. I don't think she's necessarily British, but the mother, and she lays eggs, and according to what those eggs are fed, how those eggs are fed, they become either worker bees or male drone bees. So they all work together. The drones are primarily there just to for a new queen, if we have a new queen hatched out. And the workers, of course, they're all females, and they get out in the field and do all the hard work.
And they also help to evaporate the water out of the nectar.
They do. They have an interesting heating and cooling system, and that's their fans. They use the heat of their bodies and their wings to dehydrate the nectar, and they also use that to help warm or air condition the hive. They keep a little flow of air circulating through there, and that helps dehumidify the nectar.
I think some of them have special duties like scouts. They go out looking for areas, and they also have guards on the front of the hive.
They do. They've it's like a fancy apartment house. They've got some that sit out front and make sure they don't have any intruders come in. And then there are also like you say, the field bees, the workers that go out and look for food. So I'm not that technical in it. I'm not an entomologist, but one will find some flowers that seem to have some nectar and or pollen on it, come back, and they'll do a little dance that indicates where that source is, and the others will get interested and then start going out into wherever that source is.
And the bees are able to detect color, so that's why we have flowers that have interesting colors.
That's true. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember exactly which colors, but some of the very fancy ornamental flowers aren't necessarily something that's going to attract honeybees, at least. But I think primarily I'm a blue person. I kind of like blue and purple, and the bees seem to be attracted to that as well. But they'll if they have, for instance, two different floral sources, I believe they try to go for something with the highest sugar content in it, which gives them a little bit better boost as far as food goes.
They also collect pollen and poke it in little sacks on their legs. You can see them.
They do. I call them saddle bags. They have little bags on their back legs, and they're fuzzy. Bees are fuzzy. They're like a little dust magnet for pollen. So they'll pick this pollen up when they're in a flower, and they'll start grooming themselves and combing those pollen particles towards their back legs, and they're fun to watch when they come in full of pollen, because you can actually see the color of the pollen that came out of the flower. So sometimes it's bright yellow or orange or a pale color, and so they bring that in, and then they pack that in cells, and that's used as food.
Yes. So the food sometimes includes some micro food elements that are good for things like allergies. People can pick that up when they're buying honey.
Yes, most beekeepers don't filter the pollen out of the honey, and there haven't been any recent studies done on it, but I get a lot of customers that ask for the pollen to help with their allergies.
So how old are these creatures? How long will a queen last, and how long will a drone last, and how long will a worker last?
Well, roughly, a queen might be good at laying eggs for, say, 3 or 4 years. There are beekeepers that requeen yearly, or sometimes even twice a year, which I think is a little bit excessive, but the workers will replace her if she deteriorates in health, if she's not laying well. In the wintertime, or the queen, of course, lives all winter long. The drones, their job's over with come fall, and they all get booted out. The guys all get the boot off the front porch, and the other workers can live through the winter if they're born in the fall and are hatched out in the fall. In the summertime, they actually work themselves to death. You can tell an old bee from a young bee. If you look closely, the old ones will have ragged wings, but they'll, in the middle of summer, might live about 5 weeks or so. I'd say that depends on how hard they're working.
And they have this constitutional brain, which we don't know much about. They seem to be able to decide whether it's time for the queen to go.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to be fed a special diet so that she will become a queen.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, when the hive gets overloaded and you don't put on a second super to give the bees room, the hive will take off for other territories.
That's correct.
It might be in a tree, or so sometimes Kim goes around and collects a colony that has escaped.
If I'm lucky, and a lazy beekeeper a beekeeper will perhaps have some extra empty equipment, and the lazy way of doing it is let the bees come to the empty equipment. So sometimes you'll notice several bees investigating the new possible home for a week or two, and then, like I say, if I'm really lucky, they move right in. What happens is they swarm, they run out of room, so the old queen and about half or so of the adults, workers, leave, and they may come out of the hive and then rest on a bush or limb, and hopefully it's not way high up in a tree, but if I'm lucky, I can notice that happening and go out and catch a brand new colony for free.
For the queen, if you have the queen in hand, the colony will come with the queen.
She has, like a lot of animals, she has a mother scent, a pheromone, and they all are attracted to that. So, for instance, if they would land on a branch and I would take a pruning shear and cut the branch off in order to take them and set them on a new empty box, if I lay that branch off to the side, or if I'd happen to drop them, some of them will go back to that branch because they can smell that scent.
That pheromone.
That pheromone. There are times where I have to take the branch a little distance away, or they'll be attracted to go back to that.
So tell us a little bit more about the structure. This structure can be exhibited or seen at the Pollinatarium, which is a University of Illinois facility on South Palm. You get to it by going along Windsor Road almost to Race Street, and then you duck north and there's a Pollinatarium. And you can see the queen, you can see the workers working, and it's not exactly like a regular hive, but you can imagine what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You can take photographs.
The one nice thing about the Pollinatarium is they are open on weekends, and I often have people come by the farmers market asking about being able to take a look at bees, and I said, at your leisure, you can go out there, and they're open to the public.
We'll say something more about the Pollinatarium a little later, because there is a week coming up, and we'll mention Michelle Duane, who has been on this program. She's looking at a different sort of bee. It's a bumblebee, and bumblebees do a lot of the pollinating. If you are wanting to have vegetable crops that need to be pollinated, then sometimes you have to hire in bumblebees because they have strong shoulders. They shake flowers and get the pollen and the nectar, and they're kind of friendly. And worldwide, we're losing those pollinators. So from time to time, we have Michelle to talk about her PhD research in this dimension. But going back to the hive, how do you approach them? Do you put on a suit? Do you wear a veil? Do you have a smoker? How do you approach these creatures?
I tend to be fairly timid about it. They really don't pay much attention to people, provided that we don't become a nuisance to them. So you can actually stand close and watch them. I wear a suit because I just like to have the stress taken away. So I've got a suit that's actually like mesh and has a veil, screened part that goes over my head, and then some leather gloves.
It's kind of disconcerting to have a bee crawling up your thigh, and there's a temptation to swat it. If you do that, they'll let go pheromones, and you'll have a whole bunch of.
It's natural for anyone to want to swat something when it comes up around especially up around their head, and it's very difficult for a new beekeeper to get used to that and avoid swatting a bee, because once you've stirred them up or mashed one or two of them, that puts off a scent as well, and it does not. It just gets more and more irritated. I have a smoker. I don't light it very often. When I'm just doing some inspections, I try to carefully open the hive body up and take the top off and take a look at some of the frames without mashing any bees. And if they're busy during the day, half of them are out in the field. On a cloudy or rainy day, they get grumpy like us because they've had to stay inside. And that's a good time to leave them alone.
They also get grumpy if you have a automobile nearby. Say you have a truck to load bees for another site. It pays to leave it a little way from the hive because they just don't like gasoline smells.
I haven't had much trouble with anything like that. I've heard of them being attracted to farmers' tractors out in the field, but I haven't experienced any of that. But there are some things, mowing next to them. You don't want to throw grass clippings towards the opening of the hive. That definitely will attract them.
That's a defense mechanism. They're going to get you. If a tractor is spewing out fumes, then they're going to go after the tractor and the driver.
Of course, or something like wool, anything that looks or smells like a varmint, which is might be an enemy of them. There's a lot of little
like a mouse or something like that.
Yeah, mice actually in cold weather, mice will move in if you leave them a big enough opening, and they can stay in in the colony, but once those bees get active again, the mice generally want to leave. But yeah, raccoons and little animals like that sometimes will come out, skunks, and scratch on the front of the colony, the opening, and one or two bees will come out to see what's going on, and then they'll get eaten. So yeah, they can be a nuisance as well. I had raccoon problems last winter as well. They decided that they could get a free meal, and I had a heck of a time with them.
Sometimes you can add some water to the hive, and that will calm upset bees down some.
The smoker that you mentioned earlier, the smoke puts out that calms them down. Actually, they're concerned that the hive might be on fire, so they start loading up on honey in case they've got to evacuate. But yeah, you can spray them down with a little bit of water or sugar water, and that'll keep them from flying as much.
You have stationary hives that stay in place all year.
Yes.
But some beekeepers move their hives to new locations. When they check out the new location for the nectar and pollen that's there, you may have to have a rifle to shoot down flowers that are on trees that you can't reach, and just check it out to see that that's a source for bees. And you might have to move them at night, so you wait till they're all inside. So there's, I think, bees probably get to bed when the sun goes down. Is that correct?
When they can't see, they're up as early as they can see to get out and fly, provided it's warm enough. Most beekeepers, especially if it's somebody that's doing it as a hobby, just has one colony sitting maybe on a couple concrete block or on a 2x4 stand, or maybe several colonies there. And they don't normally move them around because it's a lot of work. It's heavy, and you have to wait till dark and cover the entrance with a screen, and then pick them up by hand. Or some people have them palletized. I'm starting on some two colony pallets that I can pick up with a forklift. So hopefully that will be a little bit easier on my back.
Yes, especially if the hives have a lot of honey in them. It's heavy.
That's true. That's true. When they're brand new, they don't weigh that much, but it's still work to pick them up and move them. And all that's got to be done at dark or in cooler weather. So a lot of beekeepers get tired of being out at night working.
Yes, well, if you have 400 hives, it is a lot of work to move those hives. And you have to move them quickly before the sun comes up. And that means traveling sometimes 200 miles to a new location where you might have suitable nectar and pollen.
That's correct. Like I say, doing it on a small scale, most people would normally leave them in one location, but if you palletize them, you can pick up, like I said, 2 for what I'm building, or 4 for a normal size pallet. Put that on a truck, stack them up, put a net over it, and tie those all down, and then move them with the truck, and then unload them again.
So now, let's say that you have supers that are full of honey, and you're going to harvest them. How do you harvest the honey?
Well, there are a couple of chemicals that we use that the bees do not like, and I call one of them something like old sweat socks, and I don't know what else, all rolled up in a barrel. But the bees tend to move away from that, and so sometimes what they call a fume board, you'd spray a little of this chemical on top, and they'll start moving down in the colony, and you can pull a super off with as few bees as possible. And then one of the other methods might be just to individually pull the frames out and brush the bees off. Some beekeepers actually use air power like a leaf blower. It's a little bit on the noisy side. I've tried it and didn't care much for it, but with patience, you can, like I say, I prefer not to stir them up any more than I have to, but
Sometimes you can shake the frame and
That's-
the them will drop off.
that's correct. That's correct. It's a little bit more labor intensive, but the optimum thing is to get back and home with the supers full of honey, and give them a little bit of time for the other bees that were lost inside to move out of the supers. And like the one time that I was just starting to extract, picked up the end of a super, and one bee was hiding underneath the end of the frame, and I hadn't even gotten started and got stung on my finger.
So now you've taken out this frame and you need to extract the honey. So the next step is you have a knife which is heated by steam or by electricity.
Yes. The frames of honey are, when honey is ripe, as we say, as low in moisture content, the bees have taken wax and capped those individual cells. So that's how we know that the honey's ready to take off. And we've got to have, it's up over 75%. In other words, if you have a frame that's completely capped, you don't have to even think about that. You just want to make sure you don't have a lot of real moist honey when you're taking this off. You can use something to scratch the cappings with. You can use a fork. You can use a capping scratcher, which is like a wide fork. You can use a heated knife, like you meant, to cut the top off. The least amount of wax that you cut off means that they won't have to work quite as hard to build that cell back up. And one of the tools that I'm anxious to try out is what they call a flail uncapper, that I roll the frames through, and it's got small chains on it that aren't heated, and that just knocks the very top of the capping off.
So that goes into a centrifuge.
It is. If you can imagine a hand-cranked ice cream maker or a centrifuge, that's basically what we're talking about, or a washing machine on spin cycle.
It pays to have a young member of the family who can turn the centrifuge.
That's for ice cream, yeah.
Well, you can do it with honey too.
The small extractors, the smallest ones hold about 2 frames, and then they go up to 4. And I had located a 6-frame hand crank, but a lot of beekeepers will have a little bit bigger one that has a motor on it, and you can adjust the speed. You fill extractor full of how many frames it will hold, and then start cranking up speed control on this. And the honey is, like you said, centrifugally forced out of the cells. And
So
then,
now that honey goes into a vat,
mm-hmm.
but you also have some wax, and some people sell honeycomb. Is
Mhm.
that sort of wasting the bees' time to sell wax?
The honeycomb is more work for the beekeeper and more work for the bees, because they have to start over from scratch. But it's a delicacy. When you way back when you lived on a farm, you didn't have a lot of extra tools. You didn't necessarily have an extractor, so the only way you could get extracted honey was to get the honeycomb out of, for instance, a tree, if the bee lived in the tree, or take the frames or comb and crush them over a bowl with the cloth to strain.
Put it in your mouth and suck on it.
Or just do that. That's why I say it's now it's I don't know whether you want to say lavish, but it's not what a lot of people see as comb honey. So you get to, with comb honey, you get to chew the wax and the honey.
So is that sort of stringent? Do you get diarrhea from too much? wax?
I know it's you can swallow it. It winds up being like sort of like chewing gum or paraffin, but chewing gum stays moist, and the wax. The more you chew the wax, the more solid it gets. So generally, people spit that out. And I've heard people say that they would take honeycomb and put that over something like waffles or pancakes, but comb honey is expensive enough now that most people just like to take a bite.
So now, when you get that honey, it's in a liquid form.
Mm-hmm.
But if you leave it in your barn for a while, it kind of crystallizes. What's going on there?
Well, that's how you know you have real honey, is because any floral source, any nectar that you get that becomes honey, after it sits for a while, is going to granulate. It's going to form one little sugar crystal, and then another one, and then another one. So I tell people it's like a batch of yeast for dough, is that it just keeps multiplying. In colder weather, when your storage temperature gets down below about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it's more apt to start crystallizing. And that doesn't mean the honey's spoiled. It just means that you either have to eat it crystallized as is or warm it up to liquefy it.
And if you don't have coldness to make it crystallize, you can sometimes add a fungus, am I right?
Well, you're thinking about creamed honey, and that's just finely granulated honey. People, similar to comb honey, it's a delicacy, and the smaller the sugar crystal, it makes it taste creamy to your tongue. So you can have the very same thing, liquid honey in a jar, as the honey butter or finely granulated honey, but people think it's different for some reason or other. Just it tricks your tongue.
It's a little bit like sugar that is very fine ground sugar.
Yeah,
It's your taste buds.
powdered as opposed to sugar crystals. Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, now I'm looking at the clock. We've got 15 minutes. We should say something. Tell me, are there any things that we've missed out that give people an idea of what honeybees are?
I got a quick question, something you've kind of touched on just a little bit. Why is honey different when the bees have been flying around clover versus, say, lavender or orange trees or whatever?
Well, you're talking about a different floral source. If, for instance, if you're a hobbyist beekeeper and you have one or two colonies and you extract all of that honey at once, it may become wildflower because you're dumping different floral sources or different flavors together. If you have enough, you can keep it separated out by flavor and color, and you may be lucky enough to have more than one floral source of honey.
Some honeys are very rare and have a certain flavor. I think Tupelo honey is
It's
rare.
the Cadillac of honey. Of course, anything you don't have is what you want.
And before we leave this, I want to say that these creatures are also pollinators. They're not as good. The Italian bee, which we're dealing with, is not as good at pollinating as the bumblebee, but they're still pollinators, and they're really having a hard time. We've taken away all the habitat for these creatures. You don't need corn does not need to be pollinated by bees. That is wind pollinated, but we have wall-to-wall soybeans and corn and a little bit of wheat. This is not very biodiverse, and then we take to the roadsides and we mow the roadsides. So tell me a little bit about colony collapse, because worldwide we're losing some of these creatures that are so important for our vegetables that we eat, to the point that you now have to go hire bees to pollinate your almonds or your tomatoes or vegetables that are really only pollinated by insect, and some of them are tremendously little, they're wild, and we need to think about that as we come into Pollinator Week. So we do have a list of things to do there, but tell me a little bit about colony collapse.
I'm probably not the best person to answer that, but when you said we a couple minutes ago, that's a good start right there. These insects have been around for millions and millions of years before we came along, and they didn't have any problems until we came along. So we've had, for instance, a couple different types of mites that attach themselves to bees, and small hive beetles, and we've used chemicals on all of our crops, and we've actually created this problem. It's just not one single thing that colony collapse is not just caused by one thing. It's a multitude. It could be viruses, but we've complicated this because we've made their lives a lot more difficult.
When bees are under stress, then these things that may not have come into action centuries ago are now likely to kill the hive.
Stress, some people will say, well, packing bees up and putting them on semis and moving them all over to California for almond pollination is stressful. Yes, that would be stressful to be thrown into a container and then hauled a few thousand miles. But we need bees to pollinate a lot of crops. So the less, just in general, the less people use chemicals, and the better off we'll be. We can't just keep dumping a chemical on something to as an easy out.
2,4-D is a prime target, for instance.
That's correct. We just got another bulletin the other day. I'm not sure whether I mailed that to you or what, but 2,4-D for spraying, and these chemicals don't go away.
And also you have to figure that there are countless thousands and thousands of miles of road mowing, and this is tremendously costly, and it takes out the pollinators. So we have the elements of an organization that is aimed at trying to preserve the dignity of the roadside wildlife as food for pollinators. Not easy, because there's a fear that this stick of prairie big blue stem or compass plant will create a nucleus for a snowdrift. And so you're kowtowing to the road people. And from the World War I on through World War II and more recently, we've had roads and cars. And really, sometimes you have to think about the right of a bee to exist, and you have to handle the drift that might be across a northwest road or something like that. So we have to think about not mowing on August the 1st or August the 30th or November. Some of these prairie plants that we're dealing with don't finish flowering till November and December. And so people who freak out because the road's not mown in August are really taking out plants that have not flowered yet. So we got to care about bees, and doing it in your backyard helps. If you have a spot where you can do this, it's being encouraged. So we have 10 minutes now, I think. So let's say something about National Pollinator Week, which is June 16th to the 22nd. There's a whole slug of interesting things happening around that date. Sort of for the period, Common Ground Food will be demonstrating various aspects of pollination. They will show you vegetables that are dependent on pollinators. The restaurants like the Big Grove and pizza people will be selling you food that is food that has been pollinated. So then look at some specific dates. There's people selling at the Pandemonium. There will be pollinated donuts. And on the 15th, Michelle Duane will discuss some of her interest in bumblebees, but she's been to Latin America, to Mexico and other places, looking for bumblebees and what ones are extinct or near extinction and ones that we have to care about. Friendly bumblebees, they're so interested in harvesting that you can often just put your finger on them and pat their back. They're hairy, they just have strong muscles, and they can open a flower and carry away pollen which they cross-pollinate to other flowers. It's already started. We have penstemons out there in flower at the moment, and bumblebees are on them. And also tiny, tiny little wild bees that might only be 1/16 of an inch long. You have to get down there with a eyeglass to see them. So on June the 16th, the Urbana Free Library will have Leslie Deem, who is in charge of the Pollinator Center. We'll be talking about important pollinators. Common Ground gets involved on the 17th with pollinator samples. The Douglas Branch Library will have a section on pollinators. The Pizza M, which is opposite Busey Bank on Main Street, there's a pizza parlor there. They will be having pollinator trivia next to the CoLab, where Chris Carl and Meredith Foster have an art exhibition that often takes them to the Palmer Farmers Market or to Heartland Pathways. Then June 22nd, the Pollinatarium will be open. There'll be a session from 2 to 3, I think, is crafts that involve bees for young folks. And then there will be a workshop on native bees. And then following that, there will be a cello rendition. I don't know whether it will be the flight of the bumblebees and a few other things like that, but we're working about it. So you can get hold of this information from especially Michelle Duane, who I think is probably the chair of the Pollinator Week. And her website is life.illinois.edu, entomology, pollinators, and that's not her.
That's the U of I.
That's the U of I pollinators. Let me read it again. Life.illinois, spelled out, .edu/entomology/pollinators, and then a slash, and you should be able to get to a Pollinator Week flyer, and you still have time. It's the 16th and 22nd, and we'll probably have some more about this because we just, it's very sad that this very functional animal is being lost.
An easy way to find that webpage may be to simply go to a browser and type in a search engine and type in Pollinator Week, University, Illinois, and it's bound to bring you to that page and perhaps a few others that have pretty pictures of bees. And the page where they want you to show them pictures that you've taken of bees and found, oh my gosh, we thought that there were no bees of that type in this state anymore, and you just went and found one. Since we're down to the last couple of minutes, can you talk a little bit about what people can do at their homes how would you get started beekeeping? And if you don't even want to go to that extent, what would be good kinds of flowers? If you just like the image of the bees gently flying around through the, some pretty plants that you've got, what would be good plants to start with?
Well, you can always find me at the market for questions on Saturday mornings. There are a load of beekeepers around that will be happy to help you get started. And just please don't spray your lawns. Get some flowers going out there.
The dandelions aren't that bad. When I first came
Right.
here, I saw acres of dandelions on Cunningham Avenue, and I can remember photographing them. I thought they were so beautiful. About half an hour later, they were all mown out. But things like thistles, people can't stand bull thistles. They mix them up with Canadian thistles. And really, you take a bull thistle that's in flower in November, and it's alive with creatures.
I let the sweet clover and dandelions in my yard go to seed.
Yes, we have a problem with sweet clover. It's very invasive for Prairie, so we're in conflict with.
We have different views on it, but the
I was
bees,
hoping
the bees
we would
like
reach,
it.
I was really hoping we would reach this point because clover good, clover bad, all here in one program.
Yeah.
That could be 10 minutes right there.
Have a time. There's some lecture series on. June 8th is poisonous parasites and pathogens. That's at the entomology department. It's Sunday at 2 p.m. So there's one today, 2 p.m. Poison, parasites, pathogens, and pros and cons of having 50,000 roommates. So that will be Nick Nager, Department of Entomology. June 15th, 1 week further on, finding new bumblebee species. And that will be Michelle Dwayne. And then June, another 7 days, 2 o'clock again, Nurturing Native Bee Workshop, Entomology grad students, Department of Entomology. And, there may be continuing lectures like that. So the location is the Planetarium. So go along Windsor Road, going east. You just pass Race Street and go north. If you're going from the west, you go along Windsor Road, past Lincoln Avenue, and about a quarter mile past Lincoln Avenue, go north. And it's very obvious. It's got murals around it. Well, thank you, Kim, for coming. And this is Kim Campbell.
Thank you for allowing me to be here.
He stayed overnight so he could do this. So we thank you very much. And thank Dave on the board. And this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.